Did you know that your driver manuals and policies could become the detonator of a nuclear verdict against your trucking company? Stay tuned and we'll learn more about this latest plaintiff's tactic in this episode of HDT Talks Trucking. I'm Deborah Lockridge, and welcome to HDT Talks Trucking. If you're concerned about how to defend your company against aggressive plaintiffs' attorneys who target trucking, you've probably heard of the reptile theory, but there's another type of attack that these lawyers are using that hasn't gotten as much attention. And with me today to talk about that is Doug Marcello. He is a longtime trucking defense attorney. He is currently with Saxton Stump, and he's chief legal officer for Bluewire. Represents trucking clients across the country, and by the way, he has a CDL himself. Doug, welcome to HDT Talks Trucking.
Thank you, Deborah. Honored to be here.
So tell us about what you're calling the rules of the road. What are those to an attorney that's targeting a trucking company in a legal action?
But what happened, Deborah, is that the plaintiff attorneys would get into these cases and the judge would tell the jury to decide what's reasonable under the circumstances. Well, the jurors will look at it and go, gee, I've done stuff like this driver's done, and they would be forgiving. The plaintiff attorneys were losing. They had to come up with something else. So they said, look, if somebody runs a stop sign, they violated a rule of the road. That's black and white. Why can't we make more things black and white, set up these rules so we can say there's a violation, they're at fault, they're negligent? So what they did is started to look, starting with the vehicle code, but then went on regulations. Well, that makes sense. But the ultimate is they have gone to company manuals, policies, and procedures. And their theory is that, well, if you've developed these as your own policy and procedure, you've established your own rule, like a rule of the road. And if you have, or your driver has violated that, well, then you're liable or should be at fault just as that. So what they'll do is they'll call through the company manuals, their policies, their procedures, and then set up what is in there for rules in the instances where they haven't been followed. Use that as an argument and a basis for negligence in the case.
And they have access to all that information, I guess, through the rules of discovery and that kind of thing.
Through the discovery process, they ask for all this and any type of manuals, training, information, policies, procedures, all that stuff they do. And then they'll also go out and call your web pages, internet, newsletters, etc. Anything they can find that will be something that they can say, hey, here's a principle that they adopted and this driver or the company didn't live up to it.
All right, we're going to get into some more details right after this message.
Scraper Systems by Right Height is North America's leading name for automated rooftop snow removal from truck fleets. Safely clear 24 inches of snow and ice in less than 30 seconds. Scraper Systems fleet plows help reduce winter risks, protect your brand, and get your fleet on the road quickly after a snowstorm. Machines are available to ship today. Contact scrapersystems.com for more information.
So, Doug, can you give us an example of these rules of the road problems that can occur from some of your experience defending companies?
Yeah, so sometimes, Deborah, for example, a company will put things into a manual and they'll make it absolute in there. And it'll be situations where there will be established as a rule on there that the plaintiffs then will use against them. Your manual tells you never pull off the side of the road to do anything. The manual will tell you, never to do a U-turn. And if the circumstance arises in the accident, they'll use that against them. Sometimes, Deborah, it comes up, it's self-inflicted harm. For example, one time a company put in their manual that we only do drug and alcohol testing if the individual is in an accident where there was a death, treatment away from the scene, or the vehicle was towed. The FMCSA Hearst nursed or towed. They left out the part in there about for the towing and the treatment away if you get a ticket. So while they follow the FMCSA regulations, the plaintiff goes, well, that's not in your regulations in your manual. You didn't say anything about only when they get a ticket. and thus you failed to follow your own procedures in terms of getting a drug and alcohol post-accident test on that. And that's how it's often used in there.
So is this something new that's come up?
It's actually been around for a while, Deborah. The book itself probably came out around the time of the reptile theories, I recall, 2008, 2009. And it's been practiced for a number of years. But it has been in the trucking seminars, it's been eclipsed by the reptile theory. Everybody talks about the reptile theory. Rarely do you hear about, if ever, about these rules of the road. And in some ways, the rules of the road has been kind of subsumed in the reptile theory. It's something that they do in there as well. But it's been out there. It's been used quite a bit. And it's a situation where it just needs to be recognized and addressed by companies.
So for any readers or listeners or viewers that aren't familiar with the reptile theory, can you just give a short description of what that is?
Yeah, I'm an attorney, Deborah. Short description? Come on. Now,
give it your best shot.
Reptile theory is the plaintiff's attack in which they go directly to the survival instincts of the jurors. And they try to make a case, not just a mere accident, but it's a case of communal safety, and say to the jury, you need to act to save and protect your community in this instance. It doesn't look at the facts of the accident. It's one of a systemic failure, and they try to use that, parlay that into a large verdict. How'd I do?
That's that's pretty good. So that actually brings me to the question. I was going to ask something that you had written about in talking about the rules of the road was that systemic failures. And so why does that make the rules of the road so potentially damaging?
What they try to do and to show is that the violation here is one that happens frequently. So by doing so, what they're trying to say is, jurors, you need to hit them with a large verdict to put an end to this problem. To change the system, to heal the systemic failure that this trucking company keeps having. Otherwise, this will happen over and over and happen to more people, threatening you and your community members in this.
And so the trucking company isn't even following their own manual, so, they must be bad.
Yeah, exactly, Deborah. And what happens is, I think in kind of the message that I wanted to get out and opportunity here, which I greatly appreciate, is to go back and look at your manuals. A lot of times folks see them as an opportunity to put, very, platitudes of safety in there that we all agree on. But here's the deal. My thought is our manuals and policies are the things that we want and need the drivers to follow. And it's something to follow that. It should be something that they will read or learn from in doing so. In today's society, I don't know that prose in many instances in terms of manuals and things is the way to go. We have a lot of learners who will do it by, maybe checkpoints or bullet points. In today's YouTube society, short videos. So it's a lot of things like that. There's a company, a trucking company, that they've reduced their policies, their principles down to 6 principles, kind of like those of us who took the Smith system. And if you follow those 6 principles, you have adhered to all that they want you to do. So it's kind of minimizing what are the key effective principles and policies you really need your drivers to follow, without going on for things that are, while might be aspirational, are going to come back to haunt you later on.
So what are some of the common mistakes that you see made in manuals?
Well, I think a couple things. Number one is where they'll quote from other, safety publications or other things like that. The problem with that is it leads you to in a deposition to where the plaintiff attorney will say, well, you quoted that safety manual in there. Well, part of it, yes. So you think that's authoritative? Yes, I do. Well, let's look at the rest of the safety manual, and it opens you up to having to live up to those standards. Like I said, having things in there before in terms of incomplete legal statements, where they wanted to follow the FMCSA regulations, they didn't quite get it right in there. Also to have things in there that while you're going to set the standards for your drivers and companies, that you're not willing to enforce, because you're worse having something in there and ignoring it than you are putting it in there and enforcing it. You got to be willing to live with it. One of the things is a phone policy. Number one, if you're going to have it, number one, for your drivers, enforce it. And number two, it should be across the board to everybody in your company. Because one of the worst verdicts was a phone-related accident that occurred from a salesperson. And the plaintiff's argument was, well, that they shouldn't be on the phone because this is what you do with your truck drivers. So those are the type of things you have to look at and think about overall on that.
How often should fleets review their safety manuals and policies? I think we've all seen companies that they write something and it kind of sits there for quite a while.
Yeah, it's probably good to do it on a regular basis. If you don't do it in between that, at least on an annual basis. One of the other things, Deborah, is like you're saying, these things tend to grow. Something happens, so they put a policy. It's like insurance policies. You can always tell when there's a new policy form because something happened that they didn't have covered in the policy, so they put it in again. Well, what you want to do is to make sure that you don't have conflict within those policies. You want to date the policy pages because if you can imagine in litigation, they'll say, what was the manual driver had? We need to know what date or what volume it was that applied to. Consider, do I still need that policy? Is it still applicable? Am I still enforcing it? But to go through it on a regular basis. Because otherwise, what will happen is we'll have a policy out there that will have originally the driver will get a manual, but the updated policy will be way beyond that. So it's something that needs to be called on a daily basis, or I shouldn't say daily, but an annual basis at least, to make sure that you haven't crossed those lines.
I think a lot of fleets have spent time putting together manuals and safety to say, look, this is important. We are committed to safety. These are our rules. Obviously, you don't want to go the other extreme and not have any safety manuals. How do you strike that balance between, having and then one that covers sort of everything you might possibly want, which could potentially lead you down to some problems, or being not enough?
Yeah, and it's an art, not a science, Deborah. It's there used to be that show on television where the woman would go into a house to see how she could help them reduce the clutter in the items they had, and her basic question was, "Does it bring you pleasure?" Well,
Right.
I think in our instances, does it bring us safety? And I think that's what we need to do, is to look at kind of a minimalist amount on that and able to say, this is something that we need and will actually promote safety. Because too often there's a feeling that, well, I'm going to put all these great sayings and everything in here, but either you don't live up to them, they don't follow them, or it's something that's that just accumulates over time. There was I read an article in the New Yorker a couple months ago where somebody had a company put out a letter that said safety is our highest priority, or something along those lines. That was those folks that built that pressure tank that went down, supposed to be a submarine to see the Titanic, and imploded. That was their saying in that.
Wow.
Yeah, and so it's a situation where you look at what are the policies and procedures you want, the emphasis you have for your drivers, and then reduce it to those things. Because what happens in a deposition, Deborah, is they'll say to the driver, is that your signature on this page? Yeah. And did you sign for the manual? Yeah. Did you receive a copy of the manual? Yeah. Did you read the manual? Well, just having something in a manual that you gave to somebody isn't enough. I think you need to look at a way of how do we best convey that to our driver population.
Right. You're not expecting them to sit down on their own time and read through a long, dry, boring manual.
True confession time, Deborah. I've got, I don't know how many cars in my lifetime. The only time I look at the manual is when I have to remind myself what oil to put in it.
You're going, where is that? I can't find this in this manual.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Hopefully our trucking safety manuals are easier to use than the car manual.
I am hoping so. Yeah, and it should be reduced on that. Absolutely.
All right, Doug, I think we're about out of time. Anything else you'd like people to know about this rules of the road and what their manuals and policies can do?
Short summary, Deborah. Again, honored to be here. I think the key thing is this. Think in terms of, do I really need this policy and procedure? Will it promote safety? And bring it down to the least common denominator in those facts. because, expanding on it, platitudes, they're only going to get you in trouble under this circumstance.
All right. Well, Doug, thank you so much for your time today. Good to have you on HDT Talks Trucking. And to our audience, don't forget to subscribe to HDT Talks Trucking on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss an episode, and sign up for our e-newsletters to stay on top of trucking news and hot issues like the one we're talking about today.